Now let's move on to more sort of purely theoretical discussion. And so we'll look at the ChatGPT definition, see how that goes. Then we'll look at the philosophical definition of dignity. There's both a kind of a negative or protective definition of dignity, and then there's also a positive and enabling definition of dignity. And then we will look at a more practical understanding of dignity. So ChatGPT. Let's see what ChatGPT says today. I can't remember how I phrased the question last time. Define dignity in AI ethics in 50 or fewer words. Okay. All right. So we'll do it to 100 words. Let's see. So the 50-worder, dignity in AI ethics refers to the principle ensuring that AI systems respect the intrinsic worth of all individuals, avoiding harm, bias, and infringement of human rights and freedoms. That's really a lame definition, right? Dignity in AI ethics refers to principles ensuring that AI systems respect the intrinsic worth of individuals. And that's almost a tautology. It's almost saying dignity is dignity. Dignity is a principle that people's dignity be respected. And then so that's the first part that's just worthless. It doesn't tell us what this intrinsic worth is and what is the experience of it. How do you define it? And then the second part, it says avoiding harm, bias, and infringement of human rights and freedoms. So here, in the second part, ChatGPT isn't even telling us about dignity. It's talking about other things like bias, which is part of fairness, or infringement of human rights. Well, that doesn't mean anything on human rights. And freedoms, well, that's autonomy. That's a whole different subject. So we have discussions about fairness, different, and freedom, that's autonomy, different. And then human rights, too general, doesn't mean anything. Avoiding harm, too general, doesn't mean anything. And at the start, as I say, dignity equals intrinsic worth. I mean, that says a little bit, but not very much. So dignity, you can see, is ChatGPT has a hard time with dignity. Let's see what's on the 100. Dignity in AI, I think, of the respect for the intrinsic worth and autonomy of all individuals. Okay, it's making the same mistake. Intrinsic worth, that's good. But then autonomy, so it's defining one value, dignity, in terms of another one. But the whole idea is to define it in terms of itself. If we want to talk about autonomy, we'll talk about that separately. In the design development of AI systems, demands these technologies do not cause harm. Okay, that just doesn't mean anything. Cause, what does harm mean? Discriminate, that's fairness. Infringe upon human rights, same thing again. But human rights doesn't mean anything. And freedoms is autonomy. Advocates the creation of AI that enhances human capabilities without replacing the diminishing value of human contributions. Emphasize the need for AI to support diversity and fairness. Those are important considerations, but that's not dignity. Those are fairness considerations. Privacy, again, same problem. That's not dignity. So you can see ChatGPT is just completely destroyed by this. The machine has no way to define or even to begin to understand what dignity is. And there's a reason for that. It's difficult. Dignity is a very hard, unlike personal freedom and unlike privacy. Privacy is going to be very easy to define theoretically, very easy, suspiciously easy. But dignity is, I think that I have some confidence that dignity is the most difficult of these initial principles to define clearly. It's very difficult to get your hands on exactly what dignity means. The experience of dignity is perhaps a little bit easier, right? The experience, we said, is this feeling that you're being manipulated, that you are being used as a pawn in someone else's projects, for someone else's goals and someone else's successes. So that's the feeling of dignity. But how do you define exactly what counts as dignity or what is not dignity? that will be very difficult to do. But let's start. Let's take a run at it. Dignity, we've said it has the negative or protective side, and then it has a positive and enabling side. The protective side, this is one of the more famous sentences in the history of philosophy. It's that you should treat humanity, that means just people, you and I, whether your own person or any other, doesn't mean anything, it just means treat people always as an end and never only as a means. So that's the key part. Treat others as an end and never only as a means. Now, what does end mean? End means the idea of end and means in the sense that something can be a means to an end. Right, so for example, money is a means. I mean, no one wants money just to have money. Money is a means. The reason you want money is because it allows you to buy that great penthouse apartment or a beer at the bar on Saturday night, or right, what have you, depending upon how much money you have. But no one is happy, or except people who are kind of strangely greedy, right? No one is happy just holding on to their money, looking at it and feeling it and things. People put their money in their bank accounts because they really don't care about money. Right? The reason they can put it in a bank account is because no one takes pleasure in just having the physical money. The reason you want the money, and the only reason you want it, is because it allows you to get something else. Right? So money is a good example of a means to an end. And applying that logic to the idea of dignity, dignity in the sense of a protective principle, is the idea that people should not be treated like money. They should not be treated only as a means to an end. And therefore, we can say maybe a little more positively, right? Dignity itself, the definition of dignity itself, is not being treated as a means to an end, not being treated as a way to get something else. And I think that's a start for a definition of dignity, and it's very much of a protective definition, right? In the sense that it forbids other people from doing things to you, from treating you in a certain way. And I think it's pretty clear if you go back to the OkCupid experiment, it's pretty clear that this definition of dignity is definitely being violated by this experiment, which takes the clients of OkCupid and simply uses them as tools, right, in order to get a result about how the platform can be perhaps improved, how the platform is working and how it can be improved. But that brings us to an important word in the second part of the definition. Treat people as an end, not as means. But it says, very importantly, never only as a means. So Kant leaves open the possibility that you can respect someone's dignity if you treat them in a way that perhaps both uses them as a tool in someone else's projects, but also leaves some area where they are pursuing their own purposes or have their own projects or have a clear way to their own successes and their own achievements, goals, projects, and so on. So what Kant wants to say is, look, it might be true that in real life, it's very difficult to not treat people, at least in some situations, as tools in our own projects. But dignity can still be maintained if, while we do that, we also are trying to help them with their own projects. Right. So the idea of dignity defined is not being treated as a means, as a tool in someone else's projects. But when you take that into the practical reality, kind of says, look, it's very hard to maintain that. So we'll allow a little bit of that violation as long as some part of the treatment also serves your own ends. And then I have a good case here, just below. If I hire you, let's say, to write me some code, and I buy a computer for you to work with, is there a difference between how I treat you and how I treat the computer? Right? I mean, in some sense, I'm treating you and the computer in the same way. I'm treating you as a means to my end, right? I'm getting the computer and hiring you because I want you to make and code for me, let's say, a dating site. I want my own James Brousseau dating site. We will call it Even Better Cupid, right there. So I've got my own dating site. I think it's a great idea, but I don't know how to code. I don't know how to make it work. So I hire you to do that, and I buy you a computer. It sounds like I'm doing about the same thing as OkCupid. I am just treating you as a thing. I'm exploiting you, right? I'm saying, look, here's some money, and I want you to do something for me. It's the same thing I do with the computer. Here's some money, and now I have this computer which does something for me. And then there's an aspect of this kind of dignity, which also is this idea that people are things, or yes, people are reduced to things in the sense that they are disposable. So think about what happens when a computer stops working. When a computer stops working, we just throw it in the trash and we get another one. Well, to a certain extent, if I hire you to do code for me, and then you kind of start failing, right? You write bad code. What do? I just fire you and I hire someone else. So you can see there that I'm really treating you like a thing, as something that is replaceable. So part of the notion of not having dignity, or part of the notion of being treated as a means, is this idea that you are disposable. Right? And then connected with the idea that you are disposable, there is also the idea that you are replaceable. So when I throw the computer out, I just buy a new computer. And in fact, I really don't care. Maybe I buy a new computer which is the same make and model as the old one. And it makes no difference to me, right? I don't feel like I've lost anything. And the same thing with hiring people, right? If I fire you and then hire someone else, and if I'm treating you without dignity, then I feel like it's just one thing traded for another. I mean, I don't care whether it's John or Jane who's doing the coding. Makes no difference to me. And I think there's something similar to that. Again, going back to the OkCupid experiment. That is, it really seems like the users are being treated as kind of replaceable things, or disposable things. And if their experiences are ruined, their romantic experiences are ruined because they didn't get good matches, well, who cares? We'll just go get new clients. So that's the idea of how people can be treated as things or exploited. They can be exploited or used as a tool or only as an instrument. And then as against that, dignity is this idea that, well, people are not supposed to be treated that way. They're supposed to be treated, going back to ChatGPT, as having intrinsic worth in themselves. And then how can we put add some meaning to that? We could say, look, if I hire you to do code, not only I am treating you like a computer in some ways, but it is also true that I am giving you a paycheck that you can use to pursue for your own projects. This is really the key point here, that in some ways, when I hire you to do code, I'm treating you just like the computer I purchased. But there is this other way. When I give you a paycheck that you can use to pay tuition at the university and take your classes and pursue your own career, find your own purposes, create your own destiny, do your own thing, right? Find your own way in life, all that kind of stuff. What this projects, let's use that word, what this projects is a way that I am using you as an end in and of yourself and not as a means to my end. That is, I'm giving you something, a way to, again, to find your own purposes in life. So the idea that people should be treated always as an end and never only as a means for Kant and for dignity is the idea that whenever we interact with others, we must find some part of that interaction which allows them to be understood and used. Maybe used is not the right word. Allows them to be understood and to live as though their own lives have meaning and importance for themselves. So, use as an end and never only as a means is this idea that is pretty hard in real life to not relate to other people as things sometimes. But there should never be a moment or a time when they are used purely as things. And then to wrap this up, I think that in the OkCupid experiment, what someone like, his name was Christian Rudder, I think, what he could say is, well, look, that's me. That's what I did. I used my clients not only as means. I used them to some extent as tools. I exploited them to make my platform better. But the reason I did that is so that they themselves would get better service later on and have better luck in finding their own matches and then living their own life the way they want to. So the protective idea is that people should be treated always as ends and never only as means. And I think that the easiest way to understand that in more typical common language would be that people have a right to not be exploited or used as a tool or an instrument. And then some people also like the phrase, they say, people have a right to not be commodified, to not be treated as like corn or grain that gets traded in the markets in Chicago. Okay, so that's the negative or protective definition of dignity. And now let's shift gears a little bit and think of a positive definition. And this one is a little bit more convoluted is not the right word, but it tends to give people a little more pause to kind of think through it. So Kant writes, even if a civil society were to dissolve itself by common agreement of all its members, for example, if the people inhabiting an island decided to separate and disperse themselves around the world, the last murderer remaining in prison must first be executed so that everyone will receive what his actions are worth. Okay, so this is pretty severe, right? Kant says, look, and imagine a society dissolves and everyone goes somewhere else. If there's a murderer in prison, that person must be executed so that everyone will receive what his actions are worth. Now, how is this part of dignity? Well, what Kant understands is that an aspect of dignity, and this is an aspect which doesn't protect you from the way others treat you, but instead it enables you yourself to have dignity. Part of having dignity is expressing the imperative, let's say, to take responsibility for your own actions. What Kant wants to say is there's this idea that when I take responsibility for my own actions, I am acting with dignity, or I am embodying dignity. So let me give you an example. I think that the example of babies is a very good one here. We all know that if a baby, a toddler or whatever age this is, when babies and toddlers, when they go and they steal from another, or just, it's not really even stealing, right? When you put two babies together, two toddlers together, one toddler will inevitably start playing with a rattle or a toy, and the other toddler will come up and just take the toy away, and the first baby will start to cry because it just had his toy stolen or taken away. When that happens, we don't get mad at the baby, right? I mean, we don't punish, we don't send the baby to jail. Instead, what we try to do is we try to teach the baby that, well, you're not supposed to steal things from your friends or You're not supposed to steal things in general. So you bring the baby back over and have them give back the rattle or what have you. And again, the reason you do that is to teach the baby to take responsibility for his or her own actions. Right? You're not doing that. You're not doing that because you're angry at the baby or you're trying to punish the baby. Because we all say, look, the baby doesn't know any better. Right? It's not the baby's fault that the baby takes the toy away. Babies just think, well, there's a toy I want, so I will go get it. Animals do the same thing, right? People, when you see birds fighting each other for a worm or something, and no one thinks, well, that's a morally or ethically bad bird, it should be punished. We think, no, that's just the nature of birds. They see a worm and they want the worm. They don't know it's wrong. And for them, I don't think it is wrong, right? To try to take the worm from some other bird. Same thing with babies. Right? It's not wrong when a baby does that. That's just their nature. And what we try to do as parents, and I mean, not just you and I, but I think in history everywhere, what parents try to do is they try to instill in the baby a sense that it is wrong, right? And a sense that the baby is responsible for their own actions. They can't just wander around taking whatever they want. That's their nature as babies, of course. And again, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with them, but we try to teach them to have accountability or responsibility. So taking all this back to Kant, what Kant says is, look, when the reason that you need to execute the prisoners at the end is so that they have the accountability for their actions. To not execute the prisoner is to treat the prisoner like a baby. Is to say, oh, we don't need to punish you. You're like a baby. You don't know any better. It's condescending. I think that's really a critical part of this definition. The idea that it's condescending. If you don't execute the prisoner, if you just say, oh, you can go free, you're treating the prisoner like a baby. Right? You're saying that the prisoner doesn't know any better. It's just a silly prisoner, doesn't know any better. No reason to punish this prisoner. So Kant says that kind of treatment, treating someone as not knowing any better, is like treating them like a baby. And that is, for Kant, that is to strip away their dignity. So part of what it means to have dignity, as I say, the protective part is that other people do not treat you like tools or things. But this positive part is the idea that you take responsibility for your own actions. And for someone then to say to you, well, no, you don't have responsibility for your own actions, that's offensive. That's insulting. That's condescending. And it is all those things because it is an attack on your dignity. It's an attack on the idea that you are more than a baby. You make your own decisions and you take responsibility for those decisions. That's dignity. A baby doesn't have that. A baby has the potential for that. And so maybe you could say, look, a baby has dignity insofar as he or she has potential to take accountability for his or her own actions. But at the moment, right, that a baby is a baby, they don't have that kind of dignity. Right? The moment that a baby is a baby, we do condescend to little children, right? We say, look, you don't know any better. We don't blame you because you haven't been around long enough to figure things out. It's not their fault, but it is condescending. And the idea is finally that dignity means dignity means refusing to be treated as a baby. That's the positive or enabling aspect of dignity. That is, it's the right to accountability, the insistence that I make my own decisions and I take responsibility for them. That's the positive expression of dignity. And then, of course, if you go back to the OkCupid thing, then that relates there too, because you say, look, people can't take responsibility for their own actions when they're being manipulated in ways that they don't understand. Dignity in the dating world would be, look, I take responsibility for going out with you or breaking up with you and so on. But you can't do these things if you're being manipulated by the dating website. Okay, so I think here's a question to wrap up the second idea of dignity, the positive part. Going back to Kant's idea that if people are inhabiting an island, decide to separate and disperse around the world, the last murderer remaining in prison must first be executed so that everyone will duly serve what his actions are worth. The question is, who benefits from the execution? Who wants, and this is the part I really want to underline, who wants the execution? And dignity is the idea that the person who benefits from the execution, the person who wants the execution, is the murderer. The murderer wants to be executed as an expression of his or her own dignity, as an expression of the idea that I take responsibility for my actions and I am accountable for what happened. That's dignity. The idea that I don't run away from my actions. I am my actions. So I think that this is a point where when I teach this class live, I frequently have to kind of stop and go through it a few times. But if you can sort of internalize this idea that the person who benefits from the execution is the murderer, him or herself, right? Then you've got a good grip on the idea of this positive notion of dignity, which is dignity means the ability and the right to take responsibility for your own actions, or to put it in a more colloquial way, the right to not be treated like a baby, right? To not suffer condescension, to not be seen as incapable or incompetent. Right? So the positive idea is of dignity is that I take responsibility for my own actions. Okay. So and I think we can say that we have kind of two sides to the dignity understanding. The idea that we should be treated as ends and not only as means, which implies that we should not be treated as tools or exploited as things that are replaceable and disposable. That's the one side. The other side is we have the right to accountability, to take responsibility for our own actions, and we are capable of doing that. So those are the two sides of dignity, of the philosophical definition. And then here's a quick practical case. Is the user dignified by this interaction? And the interaction I'm thinking of is these crazy TOS terms and conditions, right? Where we've all had this experience where we're downloading software or something and they ask us to do the terms and conditions, and there's a checkbox and we can always click to read the whole terms and conditions, but no one ever does that, right? I mean, it's never happened in the history of the world that anyone has actually read the terms and conditions. You just check the box and you go on. So the question I have here is, well, I mean, the way I'm putting it, is the user dignified by this interaction? And I'm not sure. It's hard to be absolutely certain. On the one side, it's true that the user is being respected. Let's take the second part of it. The user is being respected as someone who takes responsibility for his or her own actions. You check the box. You take responsibility. Here's the terms and conditions. If you decide that you don't need to read them and you're just going to check them, well, that's fine. You're an adult. You're not a baby. I'm not going to condescend to you. If that's your decision, you can do that. So in that way, these terms and conditions, in that way, they do, in fact, support, or rather, they treat the user as being dignified. On the other hand, it's also true that no one ever reads the terms and conditions, So there is a sense in which users are being manipulated because you can put whatever you want in those terms and conditions. And people do put a lot of crazy stuff. Like most websites put in clauses where they say, if you sign up for our website, we can, maybe they don't say this explicitly, but they do say something to the effect that we can use you as tools in our experiments, right? They find some diplomatic way of putting that, but that's what they do. Right? And then they hide, to a certain extent, they hide that they're creating this legal capacity for themselves. They hide that by just making this simple checkbox, which you can quickly check and then go on with your life. Look how quick and easy that is, right? So in that way, it seems to me that this is not an example of a dignified interaction. In this way, it seems to me that users are being treated as things. They're being exploited. They're not really being given the information they need to make good decisions about whether or not they want to turn over their personal information and so on to the website. So this is a hard case. I mean, on the one side, as I say, it seems to me a little bit like people are being exploited by this. You just make it seem really easy and fast, and you don't really care about whether this agreement is good for the user or not. So it seems like you're treating them as means only and not as ends. But then on the other side, you are giving them the choice. So it seems like you are respecting their ability to make their own decisions and to not treat them as babies. So it's difficult. Dignity, as we will see, is extremely knotted, right? It's hard to find clear cases, which are not just very extreme, but in everyday life, it's very hard to find clear cases of dignity. Almost everything that we are involved in is in some ways a threat to our dignity, but also in some ways an ability for us to express our dignity. And it's very difficult to pull. It can be very difficult, as in this case, to put any experience overwhelmingly on one side or the other of dignity. Okay. Now, I promised, just to close out this section on the definition, I promised I would tell you quickly what the Facebook experiment was. You should know this. This is from 2012. I mean, not that you should know this now, but as part of taking this course, you should know this because this is a famous case. This is called the Facebook contagion experiment or emotional contagion experiment. And what they did is they changed people's, as you can read here, they changed people's feed in terms of happy things and sad things, good news and bad news. They gave them more and more good news or more bad news, more and more happy things and more sad things, and then looked to see what kinds of responses the users had in their own comments to others and their own comments on their own wall and in general on their platform, the users' own responses, or their own actions on the platform. And what Facebook found was that when they put into users' feeds more negative and unhappy things, then users themselves when they did other things on the platform, they themselves were more negative and unhappy. And by contrast, when users were receiving more positive things, then the users themselves, when they went out and talked about other people's posts or talked about things that were going on in their lives and so on, in all those kinds of other ways, the users themselves were more positive. And so there's this power here, a terrific power. We have presidential elections every 4 years. Obviously, this is a real power that Facebook has. If they can influence whether people are happy or sad, then it's a pretty short step to say, well, they can influence whether people are happy or sad about candidate A or candidate B. Or they can influence whether people are happy or sad about movie A versus movie B. And that's a very powerful ability. And it shouldn't take a lot of imagination for you to think that, well, political candidates and movie makers and restaurants and things, they might be willing to pay Facebook to manipulate the news feed of people at the moment when they are about to get information about a certain restaurant. For example, if you want to advertise a restaurant on Facebook, maybe you could pay Facebook extra money for their feed to first get some positive and happy kind of news and things. Then, bang, you get them with the ad for the restaurant, and the people are in a good and positive mood, so they say, oh, great recommendation, I love this restaurant, and so on. Or you could do it the opposite way if you want to attack your competitor, right? You could pay Facebook extra money to put the competitor's ads to nest it inside a lot of negative kinds of thinking and thoughts, and so you try to pollute their ad with this negative kind of connotation and negative reaction. So that's the Facebook contagion experiment. That was the first sort of look at that we had at the real sweeping social power that these websites have. And I think it's pretty clear from what we have said that these kinds of experiments and the use or the treatment of users as simply tools to be exploited in this emotional contagion, I think that's pretty clearly a dignity violation. Well, I don't think that is clearly a dignity violation. People are being treated, right, when their posts, when their feeds are being manipulated, people are being treated like lab rats, like experimental animals. They are being treated as ends and not means. Right? Because here, it's very difficult to see how these experiments would help the user. At least in the case of OkCupid, what the CEO could say is, well, look, I was doing these experiments on the users in order to help those users get better dates. Okay, I mean, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, I don't know, but the logic makes sense. But here, that's not the case. Here in the Facebook example, it's just pure manipulation. They are using their own clients in order to get information about how they can manipulate even more their own clients, right? So they are manipulating their clients so they can figure out how to manipulate their clients. That's a dignity violation for sure. The famous Facebook contagion experiment. Okay, so why don't we just take 5 minutes and think about, try to form your own response to the terms and conditions questions, your own question, your own thought about whether that's a dignity violation or not.